Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Roger's Realtime Talkshow. And today we have our panel back. We have Auto Excelsior. How do you say that, Auto?
Usually Excelsior.
Auto Excelsior.
Oh,
Excelsior.
Excelsior. Yeah.
And he's on Minds.com. He's usually doing a lot of projects with Bob Dub, who is also here, and you can find Bob Dub on Bobbing Along with Bob Dub and little tiny kangaroos, I believe is what you call it, isn't it, Bob Dub?
Tiny baby kangaroo, yes, on
Yes,
Rumble.
on Rumble. And we have Mark
Yes.
Edworthy, or the infamous Medworthy, the 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 English troublemaker of the uh,
Uh-oh.
of the Mines Canary community. He's the one that helps everybody else out. We commonly refer to him as Tron. So he's from England. Otto and me are from the United States. Otto, you're in New York, right?
Yes, I'm in East Central New York State.
Right, and I'm in Southern Illinois. And Bob Dub comes from all the way over in New Zealand. She's in a special part of the world, in my opinion, where things are really kind of weird going on over there. So I'd like to sometime be able to get more in depth on like the politics and stuff going on there too. So, but we, I don't know for sure if Tan Hai Tran's coming in. So, but I'll say him too. He's a Canadian, and he may be
Not the
coming
weird
in.
part.
Another,
Not the part word.
yeah.
Yeah, I've just messaged them. He hasn't looked yet, so he
So
might join us.
So he may join us. He sounded interested in it, but we will start the episode off the way we've been doing it. Like before, we'll go around like the traditional round table. I'll start the topic off. I'll keep it down to 2 minutes. And we all keep our comments down to generally about 2 minutes. And after I introduce my topic, we'll go around the room and give each person 2 minutes to respond to it. And then after that, I can have 2 minutes to respond to them. And then we move to the next person and do the same thing. So that hurt my throat. I almost ran out of breath just saying that.
Yeah.
But we'll keep it going that way. This week I was actually able to break the topics down into sections the way I wanted to do it, and I'll start this up now. I'll introduce my topic, and if you guys want to make comments on it, you can. But when it comes to your turn to introduce a topic, if you have something you want to discuss, feel free to bring it up. So with that being said, I will read what I've got here, and we'll go from there. Now, with my topic from the last couple weeks, I've already found some interesting things that I do want to bring up before I mention. Now, I mentioned the fact that with England, they had started incorporating socialist Sunday school into churches as an option to the denominational Sunday schools. And so right there it's telling us that England was already indoctrinating kids at a young age into the socialist ideas, And it went from there to an actual communist party that was formed within England. Now, I really wanted to find out to see if that actually was formed before the socialist part or the communist party in Soviet Union, but I'm pretty sure it was after, because I know that the communist party started in Russia like in the 1800s, or not the 1800s, but the early 1900s, like 1918 or 1920 and stuff like that. So, but After that, I wanted to go further now. We're getting into this area right here where we bring up the Independent Labour Party, the ILP. Now, the ILP was a British political party of the left established in 1893 at a conference in Bradford after local and national dissatisfaction with the Liberals' apparent reluctance to endorse working class candidates. A sitting independent MP and prominent union organizer, Keir Hardie, became its first chairman. The party remained positioned to the left of Ramsay MacDonald's Labour Representation Committee, which Hardie founded in 1900 and was soon renamed the Labour Party, and to which the ILP was affiliated from 1906 to 1932. In 1947, the organization's 3 parliamentary representatives defected to the Labour Party, and the organization rejoined Labour as Independent Labour Publications in 1975. At the 1922 general election, several ILP members became MPs, including future ILP leader James Maxton, and the party grew in stature. The ILP provided many of the new Labour MPs, including John Wheatley, Emmanuel Shinwell, Tom Johnston, and David Kirkwood. However, the first Labour government returned to office in 1924 proved to be hugely disappointing to the ILP. This came despite 30% of the cabinet holding ILP membership. Of the most prominent of these figures, Ramsay MacDonald was removed as editor of the ILP's Socialist Review in 1925, and Phil Snowden resigned from the ILP in 1927. So, with that, what I'm going to do, I'm pretty sure I took up 2 minutes in my running my mouth and everything, so I'm going to open it up. I think we had Mark open it up first the last time, so this time I am going to have, I guess we could have, did Bob Deb open it up already first? Did you open
Bob
it?
open
Yeah.
up. Ladies first.
No. I did on the first one. Come on, Otto. You've got to be brave. It's your turn.
So it would be Otto's turn.
Yes.
No.
So you go ahead if you have any response to what I just said, bring it up, and if not, we can pass it on to Bob Dub, and then go to Mark.
Well, it's interesting. I was actually looking into a little bit about the origins of the Russian communists, and these parties go through a lot of convolutions, and very often the same people. Excuse me, something's beeping at me here. Okay. Electronics, right? So yeah, these parties often go through a lot of name changes, and even the platforms change a little bit. But I think there's, because you're talking about a lot, it's this party and then this party, and there's splits and there's coming togethers and mergings and stuff. And I think a lot of the time it's that people have trouble fitting themselves into electoral politics. I mean, just my own experience, you look for a political group that's close to what you like. You never agree with it completely, but if you have a general idea that this is the course you want to pursue, then you're going to, these parties will always be absorbing from each other and growing. And as people become more or less sophisticated in their ideas, or if one party might seem more powerful, you might want to, join up with that one. And, when you read about all the splits and stuff, and they were saying that today, the Communist Party in Russia today, which is the second largest political party in the country, apparently, basically drove out of existence another half dozen communist parties. Basically because Putin said, okay, you guys are the loyal opposition. and they actually get funding from the Kremlin, as you know, like there are a lot of governments do that. I mean, we do that here in the States too. If you're a presidential candidate, say, I believe, I don't know about other offices, but if you have a certain amount of polling in your favor and have raised a certain amount of money, you will get matching federal election funds. You know, I think this is like, you know, putting a Band-Aid on a compound fracture as far as campaign finance reform goes. I've long been an advocate of simply removing all money from the electoral process. I don't see how that could be. I mean, this is kind of off topic, but I remember as a kid watching the news, and they would say, you know, there's a Senate race, say, and Senator so-and-so has raised so many $1 million, but this other guy has raised so many million more dollars, so he'll probably win. And everybody was saying this as if this is a perfectly normal, good thing, and that people are basically voting with their money. And obviously, the more money you have, the bigger your vote is. Nobody seemed to think this was wrong except me. And I'm like, they just say this with their bare faces hanging out, completely straight faced. And I mean, it just seems like a no-brainer. I mean, I don't think if you asked anyone whether they liked all the money in politics, they'd say they approve. But the people receiving the money certainly approve, and the people getting the money. But yeah, the corruption of party politics is, and that's actually a factor when you're looking at, I mean, I think these guys are looking at transformation of society. And I think that's an aspect of socialism we have to keep in mind. Most politics has to do with, I always say it has to do with how we're going to frost the cake. You know, in most politics, it's like we all agree we're going to have this cake, but how are we going to spread the frosting? At least that's my experience here in the States. Is this group going to get a little money? It has to do with where the funding is going to go, where we're going to be, you know, paying attention to. We're going to build up the Navy, we're going to build up the Army, and so forth and so on. But there are other people that want to make a societal change, and they're seeking to do it through political means. And I think this is something that revolutionary parties, no matter what revolutionary party you're talking about, and revolutionary parties were all the rage after 1918. Although we forget the earlier, I think it was 1905, there was an early revolution, and we can't forget the revolutions of 1848, which really shook things up a lot. So, you know, when people are trying to make societal changes, I think they turned more and more to the ballot box. You know, you think about the Nazis, and they were originally, they were going to have a putsch. They had, you know, the famous beer hall putsch. They had, I don't know, it was like 2,000 armed Nazis, and they had, you know, they were seizing this and that. Whole thing fell apart. And then after that, they said, no, we'll go to the ballot box. And suddenly they're working within the system, and they're doing this and that. And then once they get a hold of the system, then they start that transformation of society. So they're using the system to subvert the system. And I think, and again, I'm not saying this is evil. This is simply their political and ideological philosophy. And it's the same with, you know, communists, regular socialists. Any of these groups that are seeking a transformation in society as a whole, not just reapportioning the funding, not just voting on this or that treaty. Oh, we should support this country, we shouldn't. I mean, these are relatively minor things compared to things like the abolition of private property. You know, they don't go on much about that anymore, but when you read about the what was happening in the Baltic states, when old awful Adolf there signed that pact with Stalin and basically let him waltz right into Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, when you read the descriptions, I heard a lecture from a guy who had gone through all of the intelligence debriefings from people that had come from there, and the communists, when they came in, basically were full Marxist-Leninists. The enemy was the bourgeoisie, which is technically the owners of the means of production and distribution. So they were just shot at random. The orders were anyone that owned a business, anything like that, they could be dragged off, tortured, and killed at any time they wanted. So we don't really think about that, but this was the whole idea of abolishing private property. You know, it sounds good philosophically. You know, I've always talked about it before. Theoretically, you see some issues with it, and when it comes down to actually doing it, you're hurting a lot of people. So I think that's something to keep in mind. These groups change their names, but I think there's an underlying. And again, I don't think any of the people involved want shopkeepers taken out and shot. You know, I sometimes go on about, you know, people like Shaw, although he left, you know, in the Fabians, Shaw left later, Wells and all those cats. They really thought that they had the key to making society better. And from their point of view, and especially with the knowledge, you know, they take like Shaw and these guys out to see the Soviet Union. They sent up Potemkin factories and Potemkin villages, and they came back. They said, "Wow, communism works great." You know, there's a whole bunch of socialist, communist, anarchist types from the United States that moved to Russia. I think it was during the 1920s or 30s when it was like the workers' paradise.
Now,
And
let me let you bring that up again in your points, because like that's actually good stuff that you need to bring up in your topics. You know what I'm saying? Because that's actually good stuff. But like the thing that I noticed when you were talking right there that relates to me is like the name changing. Okay. Because like I even did research on it, and I found out like they weren't even the socialists. They weren't even calling themselves socialist or communism before then. Like when people use terms like realist, I'm a realist. That actually was name that they gave themselves before they actually became socialists. You know what I mean? And like now we use words like progressive. People are progressive. That progressive is another name that was changed, or
yeah,
you know what I mean, for the word socialist. So
they do twist the names a lot. Yeah.
mhm. So with that, I'm gonna freaking let Bob Dub talk, because I know she's fired up. She's
Roger. Okay, so the thing that I really picked up on was the thing that you said about corruption and bad behavior. For me, I think that yes, these name changes and the party changes and the swapping and everything, yeah, we are experimenting with thought, and we are trying to find out different ways to administer our societies, and it's difficult, and so there will be changes. The thing that I can't accept is the corruption. I think that this bad behavior, this absolute like moral bankruptcy amongst the leaders is just beyond the pale. And that's the thing that I can't believe that we just accept, as if, oh well, those are our leaders, what can you do? And we lead them. I don't know that I agree with the two-party system. I don't know that I agree with voting at all. I saw an amazing I don't know if it was a demonstration, I think it was a motivational speaker or something. He had two big circles on a screen, and they were obviously the same size. They were obviously the same size circle. There was a blue one and a red one. And he said these circles are different sizes. One of them is bigger than the other, and it's really difficult when you're looking at things and one's blue and one's red. So it's difficult to judge which one is bigger than the other. So who of you thinks that it's the blue circle? And when you looked at the blue circle, it had a clearer boundary. It looked as if it was sharper. It looked as if it could be a bit bigger. And about 3/4 of the room voted for that. And I thought, yeah, okay, well, And so then he said, yeah, but does anybody think that the other circle is actually bigger? So the rest of the room, the other quarter, put their hands up. And then he said, actually, guess what? Both those circles are the same size. But you know what he did? He got the entire room to vote on which circle was bigger, when the entire room knew that the circles were the same. Now, that is something that humans can do to other humans. They can make them choose things, even when there's no choice. So for me, the actual basic, fundamental way, the one way that we the people have a voice, has been corrupted and manipulated by these corrupt and manipulative so-called leaders. And the thing that burns my butt is that we let it happen, all of us, for centuries and centuries, since the very first monkey in the very first cave stole the very first pile of nuts there. We've just said, oh no, these bullies, it's so bad. And so yeah, for me I think it comes down to that. You can judge the quality of the person that you're observing by judging their behavior. And if the behavior is not impeccable, then the person is not impeccable. And what are they doing in a leadership role in society? There we go. That's my opinion on that there, Roger. Thank you for the time.
That was pretty good. To be honest with you, I have no actual response to that because that was pretty that was stated out pretty good. So with that, I'm gonna just go ahead and hand it over to Mark and see what his take is on that. And then after you're done, Mark, Otto needs to bring up what he was talking about because that was actually getting into some good stuff. So go for it.
The word impeccable is interesting. He he is impeccable. He is uncluttered by anything, everything, or anything. And he says, if ever. I don't know. Corruption is just a state of the human being is part of our sort of anatomy. There was a couple of things to pick up. As far as as far as parties are concerned, especially in Russia, it's worth remembering that in between 1900 and 1917, there was tons of parties. In fact, looking at Wikipedia thing there, it suggested there was something like 50 affiliated parties in 1917. Obviously, that sort of was reduced due to the revolution and the internal aftermath and fighting. But yeah, the so-called red and white fighting of 1917, 1918 reduced the parties down to sort of singular entities. We also saw later on the things like the Trotskyist movements, a split from the Soviet Communist Party to the other faction. And it's also worth remembering that in 1937, a lot of Russian government ministers just simply, let's just say, disappeared at the behest of Stalin. One day they were in the Russian parliament. Next day, they were either had a bullet in the back of the head or was shipped off to some gulag somewhere. And so, yeah, it's interesting to see the transformation. Also, coming down to more modern times, we see a lot of corruption and a lot of political, not manipulation, but a lot of political stallments. Take Iran from 1979. Sure, they've had elections every 5-6 years, but it's been really controlled elections, as determined by the council, the Iranian council. Anybody disagreed with the Iranian council's viewpoints were not allowed to run. You see this in Russia at the moment. And in fact, Palestine, they haven't had any elections since 2016, I think. So, yeah, you see a lot of corruption, a lot of manipulation, and a lot of control.
Right. Yeah, I went ahead and I checked in the notes, and it said that the BSP emerged as an explicitly revolutionary socialist organization after the uh, Bolshevik Revolution in Russia at the end of 1917, and it negotiated with other radical groups in an effort to establish a unified communist organization. So they, in England, it happened directly right after the Russian Revolution. So,
Also, there's something we've missed out on. This was coming to the end of World War One,
right,
where you had all these troops being slaughtered at the behest of their generals, and there was a sort of movement to find
anti-war.
or not anti-war, but a change of control.
Yeah, regime. Okay, so now that you are done, we have got to get Otto to continue where he left off, because he was going into some pretty good stuff. So it's your turn, Otto.
Well, I think what I was trying to say is that the road to hell is paved with the best of intentions sometimes. And again, many of the people involved in these movements really had a sincere belief that they had the solution to a lot of the problems that have been created by all the changes that have been wrought on our world. And and these changes were happening faster and faster. And yes, there were some positive aspects of it, but there were also a lot of negative aspects of the society. And of course, we all know about as industrialization progressed, and the industrial workers were the people that Marx originally were counting on. These were people that were often had to come to the cities to find work. They were used to living in more rural areas where, again, I've talked always about the parish, where there was a community, where you had family to depend on. You didn't really have social services so much. You had your family and you had your village. And this really met most of the needs that people had at the time. This changed drastically in the cities. And, between the working conditions, the living conditions are just horrible for many people that emigrated in. And there was a lot of turmoil, a lot of unrest, and a lot of people, even the people that were profiting from this, the people that were doing well with the new changes, were horrified. They kind of make fun of the way the Victorian ladies going down to the slums to hand out bread and stuff, but really the people were upset and were trying to help. So they thought, well, maybe this new system, that science was the big thing. In the old days, you would have perhaps tried to start a religious revival. But nobody really believed in religion anymore. So we had, it had to be something like economics. That's a science. We can predict the future. And it has been pointed out that Marxian economic theory is not unlike certain millennial things. Instead of course, there being a final judgment after death, evil punished, there is a final judgment before death, and the capitalists all get punished here and now, and the workers get their paradise of having, all the stuff. But yeah, people did have the best of intentions, and I actually looked up a little bit about those baseball players I was talking about. So it says here that in the first 8 months of 1931, a Soviet trade agency in New York advertised 6,000 positions and received more than 100,000 applications. 10,000 Americans went over as part of an official organized emigration. And there was the New York Times apparently had a Soviet propaganda officer embedded there. And he was saying this is going to be the greatest wave of immigration in modern history. The Soviet Union will witness in the next few years an immigration flood comparable to the influx into the U.S. in the decade before the World War. So he was saying, come on here. He says, when the day comes that foreign workers here may write home and say, things are pretty good here. Why don't you come along? There are jobs for everyone and plenty to eat. Russia is not so bad a place in which to live, and there are no layoffs or short time, and you get all that is coming to you. Well, that's not what happened. Most of them wound up by 1937. Most of them had been arrested along with untold numbers of Soviet citizens, and they're all dead. They were either executed or sent to gulags, or they were worked to death. And so that's how that went. But one thing they did leave behind, and that is baseball. They used to play baseball in Gorky Park. And to this day, there is a tradition in Russia of baseball that dates back to 1931, and those all dead now Americans that introduced the game there. And I think they even have teams there. I don't know if they're pro or not, but I think they did play at the Olympics once.
All right. So that's going to be something interesting to hear Bob Dub respond to. What do you got to say about what Otto said there?
I think it's really fascinating. I think that it is so strange how you're right. Most people are really trying to do their best. I think there's a really interesting little statistic somewhere or quote or something about how most mass murders in the world have been committed by governments who were working within their own understanding of what the law was and what the legal system was. So just having a legal system doesn't assure you of a morality. So it's really, really tricky because who do you trust? Do you trust the other guys when they offer you all these like boons? Come, we'll give you this and we'll give you that. We'll cancel your student loan and we'll give you a rebate on your taxes. And do you believe it? The thing is that the answer is yes. Yes, we do believe it. Even when we don't want to believe it, we believe it because those are the patterns of the human mind. And so it's so scary when we're looking at things like this and organizing things like this and looking at systems of organizing thought and organizing the administrative functions of our societies. For me, the scary, scary thing is like what's happened to our checks and balances that over the centuries we've allowed our governments to murder people. Surely we can do better now. Okay, we couldn't have done better then because otherwise we would have. But isn't our goal at this point in history to try and look at these terrible things that have happened and use the technology that we've developed to organize a system that works better for the individual and less better for the sociopaths and psychopaths that like to think of themselves as leaders and like to be involved in systems which control and manipulate the little guy. So, yeah, I think that my response to Otto is one of sort of great sorrow, is that all these things that look as if they're so good, in the end turn out to be just another trick.
That's pretty good. What's your response there, Otto?
Well, I was going to say it hinges in part, too, on what you were saying about corruption. You know, you read, excuse me, I was eating something. When you read the party platforms of these things, they look wonderful. I mean, we're going to do this. The government's going to own all the industries. Everyone's going to be paid fair. There's never going to be any shortages. I mean, it really does sound like a good idea in theory. And those checks and balances that you were talking of, the ones that have over centuries had organically risen and kept society relatively stable, were thrown all out of kilter in no small part through, well, you can point to just about anything and start doing a cause and effect chain, but we usually look at technological development. There was a guy who did a wonderful series called Connections on television back in the 1980s or something like that. And he talked about how just one discovery could drive a series of developments that will culminate in something that just changes the planet. And when you get vast wealth and power concentrated in one place, usually it's in the hands of one group of people who suddenly have a disproportionate amount of power compared to what they traditionally had. Now, we've seen this before, and well, think of the change in medieval Europe. We won't talk about the collapse of the Roman Empire, we could look at that too, but later on in medieval Europe, where after the Roman Empire collapsed, a system had been developed, a feudal system, which was a way to sustain life, keep, and basically keep people functioning. And actually, it was a big step up from the slave farms that these feudal manors had replaced. there was almost no money. So everything had to do with trade and obligations. You were a serf. You had to work 1 day out of 7 on the Lord's land. At the same time, the Lord could not evict you. You got to live there and your family forever. You never, that's what they call, belonging to the land. And that's saying that's such a terrible thing. But no, for these guys under those conditions, this was beautiful and wonderful. And, these guys started off being Roman slaves on these big slave farms. They had these big agribusinesses. This is nothing new, agribusinesses. There were no small Roman farmers anymore. That was like they went out with the late Republic. So these slaves suddenly were told, well, instead of working every day for us, you work 1 day. Oh, and we're no longer going to segregate the male and the female slaves. You can actually live with your wife now instead of having to say goodnight to her when she goes over to the other pen. And nobody will ever kick you out of your home ever again. At the same time, though, they had to make sure that the fighters of the group were maintained. And this all had to do with food. That's how you live. Now, money suddenly became more important as trade increased, as technology enabled people to sail farther, navigate better, transport things more easily. And then the Middle Age, the feudal system basically couldn't handle that. Suddenly scutage, which was like, instead of service, well, you could pay. Instead of showing up with your troops, to help the king fight a war during the season, you just send him a bag of gold. And then you got the whole political aspect of money because, I have an interest in medieval Scandinavian history. And one of the interesting periods of history there is the Christianization of Scandinavia. And this happened to a great extent because by this time, you had very, very wealthy Christian Europe offering to a king who decided he wanted to be a Christian, well, great, we're going to give you bags of money. And this money could completely subvert a system where everybody had to go home from fighting when it's harvest time. Well, not this new Christian king. He got a big bag of gold from the Pope, and he's able to hire like a couple of hundred Switzers, some Venetian arbalesters, and continue the war all through whatever, and just basically kicks anyone's butt. And if the people, the nobles who were fighting against him, and the nobles usually fought against the centralization of power, had like so many thousand soldiers, he could hire double that number. And so there suddenly money upset everything, and it devolved into what they generally call bastard feudalism by the Elizabethan era, where you still had some idea of the reciprocal responsibilities, but it was increasingly being turned into monetary things, and money, for some reason, it doesn't hold that same sense of community. I mean, after all, a coin is a cold piece of metal that can travel thousands of miles and go through millions of pockets, but when you're handing one of your tenants a loaf of bread, that's a very different relationship. It's not quite the same to give them a penny. And again, I'll bring up again that Elizabethan magnate who was refused a coat of arms because his gates were not greasy enough. He was not doing enough to give to the poor and redistribute the wealth. So,
all right. So
myself out.
let me turn this over to Mark Edworthy because I'm sure he's got something to say.
Couple points. When you were talking about corruption, and Bob was talking about Bob corruption, and the phrase good road to hell contains good intentions. Sorry, I'm totally that totally flew me. Yeah, sorry, I'm totally thrown at the moment. I'll come back.
All right. So I guess it's my turn. Whenever you were discussing all that, the one thing that I picked up on is like the fief system, as well as the Serbs. That it's really good that people were able to live on these lands and stuff, and only have to work 1 day a week. But the thing of it is too that a lot of people don't realize when it comes to the land was there was no hunting on the king's land. If you were caught hunting on the king's land, you were automatically executed. That was his property and not yours. You took the food that was given to you, or you were able to trade for yourself, but you were not permitted to hunt on the king's land. It was the huntsman that hunted on that land, and that was it, you know. So even there you had, you know, a hierarchy that was going on, and well, you know how it is with Buddhism, Otto. That's the reason why Buddhism revolted against Hinduism, because Hinduism has that hierarchical structure, and you stay in your place, and you're not allowed to go up in stature. So if you're born a peasant, you lived a peasant, and you died a peasant, and that's all there was to it, you know. So you had a lot of that going on, and I think what happened with socialism was that during a certain time period after like revolutionary or constitutional government actually was probably what sparked a lot of this when it comes to Rousseau and characters like that. But all of these revolutionary ideas came into play, and like everybody's real big on the idea that the United States was the first ones to fight for independence, and that's not true. There were revolutions taking place all over Europe as well, you know. It's just we ended up getting a lot of the recognition and stardom from it. Like everybody thinks of the revolutionary wing, you know, so, but it was actually everywhere. I think there's only one, maybe two governments that wasn't able to overthrow their government. And after that happened, there became the difference between the right to private property, you know, and stuff like that. So you had that going on.
Have you dropped the call? Are we back? Can you hear?
I'm here.
Yeah. You're there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
okay.
But
froze for me for a while.
I was wondering why you're sitting still for so long.
Just a couple of points.
But let me stop. Hold on a minute. Hold on. I'm almost done. But then after that took place, you know, people had disagreements on how they thought their government should be run. Should we have the right to own private property, or should we have the state own it? You know what I mean? Things of that nature. And I think that it progressed into what we call now a socialist government. You know, Karl Marx was big on the workers, you know, and the unions and stuff like that. But I mentioned it before in a previous one. What about the people who don't want to work? What happens to them? You know what I mean? Because everything that's written about the socialist regime has absolutely nothing to do with just the average person that doesn't want to work, you know. It has to do with you work, this is what you get, you know. So that's the one thing I see there when it comes to that. But there are a whole lot of crazy aspects involved in it. So since you didn't say nothing, Mark, it's your turn. I think he froze up. You there? He's there. It's just as slow.
Is he there?
Okay. Yes, sorry. You were talking about the American Revolution being the first revolution that the public are really educated about. I think you are looking at this from a very American, US-centric sort of point, because after all, as far as US education is concerned, nothing happened before 1776.
Well,
the earth didn't exist.
You're just saying that because you guys lost the war. I mean, that's yeah, that's it. You're just.
Which war? You know that?
Yeah, you're just spiteful about that. We've already covered that before. How spiteful you are because your country lost it.
we
Yeah.
I
Don't.
reminded that we just have lost 30 wars compared to
Well,
our
it's like, I mean, I disagree with your country because I think Cromwell was a really good dude. I mean, everybody calls him a tyrannical person, but you know, when you've got all these dukes and duchesses coming up to you and wanting to make you king, I after killing so many people and people in your army dying, I would be pissed off too. There'd be heads falling. I mean, if that was me. Those people sacrificed their lives, and these same people that had their independence came back to him and wanted to make him king. I'd be pissed off, dude. I would be so pissed off. So, I mean, I that's my point on it. And like the Commonwealth was founded because of freaking Cromwell. You know what I mean? There would be no Commonwealth if it wasn't for Cromwell. So, yeah,
I'm not sure if there wouldn't be.
well, I know, I know, I know.
Also,
You're an Englishman. That's the way you guys are.
also another point that needs to be considered is the movement from an agricultural to a industrial environment happened during the end of the Napoleonic Wars,
Hmm.
and it wasn't really arguably Russia didn't actually do that for at least another century.
Okay, so there we go. It's your turn, Otto. Everything
Well,
me and him just did and we talked about, it's on you now. You got to answer that. It's your turn. Have fun.
I've got my thing going crazy here. Hang on a minute. I'm trying to send somebody to the show.
We just sent you like a crap load of crazy shit. I mean, seriously.
Well, I can sidestep that entirely and get back to the question of corruption
Mhm.
and Aristotle. Aristotle is always good. When in doubt, bring up Aristotle. And Aristotle, I think, gives us at least gives me, I don't want to push this on anyone else, the clearest or a very good and clear model of how we can look at government. And Aristotle used to talk about genus and then species and this and that usual classification. So he classifies government under two different genuses, corruption and excellence. And he further divides government into three basic kinds. And again, I'm not saying that, I'm saying this is just a model that we're using, the way we model like left and right wing, for example. It has its limitations, but it has its advantages. So he says if you look at governments, they're one of three kinds, either rule by one, rule by a few, or rule by many. Now, under the genus of excellence, rule by one, that is an excellent person who is ruling for the good of all, is called a king. Rule by a few, ruling excellently for the good of all, it's called an aristocracy. And rule by the many, where it's best for all concerned, is he calls a constitution, or what we call a constitutional republic. Now, under corruption, instead of a king, you have a tyrant. Instead of an aristocracy, you have an oligarchy. And instead of a constitution, you have a democracy. And his point is that you are always going to have partial rule. You cannot have panarchy. Now, I was thinking of that. Does anarchy lead to panarchy? We're talking about government here. It's always going to be one portion is going to rule. And if you say the democracy should rule, well, again, that's not rule of all. It's only a portion. And as long as you have a static majority, more or less static majority, it is always going to permanently disenfranchise the minority. And if the majority of people are poor, which is usually the case, they will always be able to lord it over the rich. Just as the rich in an oligarchy can always lord it over the poor. So he says that the best way to deal with this, big surprise, is to use a mechanism, in this case, checks and balances as embodied in the Constitution, in which there is proportionality in the distribution of power. And for Aristotle, this is the heart of justice, is proportionality. So we have this saying in the United States, I'm sure Roger knows this, we are a nation of laws, not men. And this derives from the fact that, at least up until recently, no matter how mean-spirited, corrupt, or whatever a public servant might be, he had a higher authority that he had to work under, which was the Constitution, which, again, as Aristotle said, you should not change these things lightly. That's why the founding fathers made it very difficult to alter or amend the Constitution, although it has been done, and it may be done again. But it should be, a very serious endeavor, approached with fear and trembling, to even touch that thing. So yeah, you need something that can stand above both, but which is never going to abuse its power. And only a document can do that, because a person, you always have the danger of corruption. And especially, as we were talking about earlier, people can do things with the very best of intentions. They honestly think they're, deep in their hearts. I mean, Mussolini thought he was a really good person deep in his heart, I'm sure. I don't know about Stalin. No, I'm sure even Stalin, would justify himself anyway. I mean, everybody is in their own hearts is really trying to do the best thing in the world, except for, like, a sociopath or something like that. And unfortunately, I think a lot of those guys get into power too. So, but did I sidestep that well enough?
Yeah, you did a really good job of that. Thank you.
So I wanted to get back to that corruption thing, because when Bob had said that earlier, it started me thinking about Aristotle. Oh yeah, Aristotle. Got to bring up
Well,
Aristotle.
it's her turn next, so she'll be able to talk about it more, and then you can take jabs at her. So, like, this, because she's gonna just
She'll eviscerate me.
she's gonna just like rail into all of this and just tell us the way it is. So, with that being said, it's your turn, Bob Dub.
Bob Dub, honestly, Bob Dub sounds like a thoroughly unpleasant person, the way you describe him.
No, she isn't.
He's awful. Okay, so I think that it's interesting. One of the things that Aristotle talks about is not choosing the extremes, but choosing the middle way. And I think it's very interesting how politics, we are forced to choose an extreme. We have to choose from one party or the other party, and then the party that isn't chosen is disenfranchised, as you were mentioning. That for the next 4 years or 3 years, that entire segment of the population is completely unrepresented. I don't know that I believe that this is the only way it can be done, that these are how governments have to run. I've always wondered, like, what if you put all these people up for election and they get these votes, people stand behind them. This town likes this guy and that province likes this guy. You have these people that are chosen by the people to represent them. Why don't they all get put into the government? Why don't we have a government that is half of the capitalists doing their things and half of the socialists doing their things? And that instead of each getting 4 or 10 years to play in, they have to, in real time, take care of different issues, because there are issues that need to be dealt with by the capitalists. And at the very same time as those things are being dealt with, there are also issues that need to be dealt with by the socialists. And so having this sort of serial monogamy in government is very dysfunctional, I think. I do feel that we've come to an era where we are talking about how do we all jump in, not just all the members of one country, but all the countries on one continent, or all the states in one union, or all the countries in the entire globe. I mean, who is to say that one man is more important than another man? Are we not getting to a level of cognitive reasoning where we can start using computers and AI to make these very subtle, nuanced connections between massive populations? And so we get, like, for instance, the guy goes off to work in the morning and earns the money according to the capitalist rules, and the girl stays home with the kids and runs her home according to the socialist rules. And together, the mom and the dad run the whole family. There are ways that we use these skills at a micro level, and yet we have this idea that they wouldn't work if we tried them at a bigger level. I think it's great to be able to bring ideas like anarchy and blockchain and decentralization and all these things, because the important thing to do, I think, from what we're seeing here is that we're studying how people tried to implement ideas and failed. This closed, that folded, this changed, that resurrected here. And now we have a new way of doing it where we can actually model using computers. We can do these modelings beforehand. We don't need to implement systems first. Oh, Mark, this is so interesting. I'm so looking forward to hearing what you're going to say.
Oh, he's down
Tell
there.
me.
He's giving the
Tell
horrible.
me.
Okay,
He's giving the ugly
I don't
face.
disagree strongly on this one. First of all, you're talking about globalization, or you mentioned the idea of powers control using continents. So in this case, look at what's happened to the EU. I wouldn't say that's a very good system at all, even though the EU is technically not democratic anyway, because the European Commission. The entire argument about globalization, given the last 10, 20 odd years, that's a really dangerous thought. Also, the emphasis on technology, things like artificial intelligence, we're nowhere near that point at the moment. And I was reminded about a meeting that Carl Fox had, I think it was one of the Davos meetings a couple of years ago, in which he had a talk about essentially seeing ideas like artificial intelligence taken over and removing the entire principles of democracy. Allowing some machine teaching for ourselves and removing the human element. Again, I consider everything you mentioned to be extremely dangerous.
I agree.
Okay,
I think
so
it's dangerous.
that,
I
that,
agree, and I think it's dangerous. I'm not saying that it's easy. I just think it's time for us to start thinking about how we're going to do something to make it less dangerous than it is. That's because we can't go anywhere where it's dangerous. You just can't. We've made all these gains, and we've sacrificed millions and millions and millions of lives to our mistaken thinkings. We don't want to go back there again.
Also, in some cases, war is not necessarily, well, it is a bad thing at the time, but it will take improvements in society. The American Revolution, British English before,
brings it up.
the technology that came out of things like World War II. War should not be considered to be necessarily a bad thing in the greater
It's not always the worst choice. It's not always the worst choice. It's never a good choice, but sometimes there are worse choices than not going to war.
Okay,
I
so
think so.
let me ask Bob Dub. Are you good with your response to Mark so far? Is that what all you wanted to say?
Yeah, maybe for now it's all that I want to say.
Okay.
I do kind of agree with Mark's point. I think that it's very important to bear that in mind when having these thoughts. Yeah.
Okay. So, with what Mark said, and then what you said, I also want to add too about the whole thing about it's dangerous. You got to realize something. It is already dangerous, and for me personally, I don't feel that there's a way to avoid that danger. I personally feel that something is coming, and we need to prepare for it. And no matter how much we try to avoid it, it's coming because we have two huge forces that are at odds with each other. And no matter how hard people have tried to work between capitalists and socialists trying to live together separately but together, no matter how many times we've tried that, it hasn't worked, and it's escalated to where we're at now, okay? Like here in the United States, the elections are always right down the middle. It's like 47% voted this way, 50-something% voted this way, and it's been that way for a while, you know? So, for me personally, I don't think there's a way to avoid the danger. So, my big response to that would be just prepare yourself so that you're aware that it's coming, and don't put yourself in harm's way, because it's going to come. Whatever is happening is going to happen. So that's all I have to say.
I think I'd like to just reiterate my point from last week and the week before is that everything that I'm saying, everything that I'm coming with is an idealistic, linguistic, intellectual argument. I'm trying to project into the future. I'm not trying to deal with the actual situation that we have right now. The situation that we have right now is terribly, terribly difficult. And I don't think that not voting in this current environment is good advice. Okay. I would like to be in a place where in some years' time, we had a system that didn't rely on that divisiveness. But we don't have it now. So I think that what you say, I agree with that also, Roger, is that there's a difference between an intellectual discussion about what could happen in the future and a discussion about what we have to do right now to deal with the very, very horrible situation that we find ourselves in at many, many levels, in our local environments and in our international environments. It's very horrible.
Now it's time for Otto. It's time for Otto. Hold up.
Mark wants to say something. If Mark wants to say something, go for it, dude.
Okay.
Just one quick word. It's interesting that we're talking about voting now, because it was just today the UK government announced that the next UK general election will be on July the 4th. So 2 months' time or something. Another thing is, you talk about having one party or the other party, and the party that loses doesn't have a voice, or the electorate doesn't have a voice. But there's always the opposition. The opposition party is always still powerful. So at this present moment, Labour in the UK, in the US, Democrats. Yeah, Democrats. There is some opposition, and they do have some power. Maybe not as much power. And also there are always the upper houses, so the House of Lords and the upper house in the US, that can still, up to a point, overrule the incumbent government.
Yeah, I think a lot of my objection is in the language that we use, which I feel doesn't translate to the great unwashed. I feel that we're using things like opposition and incumbent and just those words are enough to make people who are marginally involved in the political process develop attitudes that are not helpful on the street to actually getting on with life.
Now
And
it's
I
your
feel that
turn.
the ruling party, sorry, it's my turn. It's
No,
Otto's
it's
turn.
Otto's turn.
Sorry.
He's got
Okay. Sorry, Otto.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Let's see. I had a couple of things that you were talking about using computer models as a way to obviate some of the problems they had with doing things like, well, anything from the planned political economy that the Soviets attempted, and I do mean attempted, or the planned ecological engineering of the New Zealand islands by the British with, we'll just introduce this animal, let's introduce this. And yes, one does see where if they'd had some kind of inkling through computer modeling, they might have had a better idea. Of course, though, I will remind you that computer models themselves are not perfect. And, you can never, ever remove uncertainty from these things. So I think it is a good idea to apply technology to this stuff, but we shouldn't be too confident. I think there's still a lot of room for, people that really understand what they're doing and might not be able to necessarily put it into words kind of deal. But it's, I'm a shotgun effect kind of guy. You try everything. When you're sick, I'll go to the doctor and I'll take antibiotics, but I'll also take a vitamin pill. And I'll do some meditation and visualizations, so healing visualizations. Do everything. It all helps. My doctor encourages all that stuff. Something else I was going to talk about. You were talking about the electoral politics and about politics. You were describing our system here in the States, and that's generally called winner-take-all politics. And that's in the case where whoever wins, wins, and whoever doesn't win. And this actually extends to something else. Now, this is traditional in the U.S., and if you read old books, you can see references to it all the time. It's in like a city election. Say somebody is elected mayor of a city, and he's a Democrat mayor, and the previous mayor was a Republican. That means all the appointed officials are now going to be gone, and he's going to appoint new officials. This is winner take all, and to the victor goes the spoils. These are the actual technical political terms for this, and it's very acceptable that you're going to replace everybody from the dog catcher up to the commissioner of police with your own political cronies. But then again, you were prepared to have the opposite happen when you left office. So there was always a certain understanding. You never got too out of hand because you realized that you might be out the next election. So I think one of the problems we have now is that, you've got this party that thinks it's going to be able to lock down elections forever and never have another election again, which must be heady wine to this sort of person. But you seem to be concerned about representation. And one of the things I'll point out is that, well, as I understand it, parliamentary politics, you guys have something along the lines of proportional representation, where if X number of people will sign a petition or vote for somebody, then they get on there. So it's not just I got the majority of votes, so only I represent this district. You actually can have, so that right there is something that I think creates more participation. And of course, something that we used to do here in the States, I brought this up before, but we don't do it anymore, but I forget when they ended it. But for the first presidential elections, it would be two men running for president against each other. The winner would be made president, the loser would be made vice president. So both sides would always be part of the government. And again, I think this comes from its Masonic roots. I'm not quite sure when and why they changed that. They did change some things in the government to make things more popular, like the direct election of U.S. senators. I believe U.S. senators were appointed by the governor, maybe, or they might have been elected by the legislature. I'll have to look that up, but certainly, and also the idea of term limits, for example, is another popularization. So, and you can argue whether this is a good or a bad thing. My own personal opinion is I like the idea of the proportional representation. I like the idea that you might possibly have somebody sitting somewhere in a parliament for the rampaging loony party, or an empty chair where the not a party candidate should be sitting. That's kind of neat. I just like the idea. I find it very pleasant. And also, the more parties represented in any kind of governing body, the slower it will go. And I think it's a good idea to slow government down a lot of the time. I think the worst problems happen when governments react too quickly. But when you've got enough different mindsets there to debate things, enough different opinions, slows things down. And I don't know if it actually works in practice, but in theory, if you take more time over a decision, it should be a little wiser. On the other hand, I'm sure those of you living in parliamentary democracies can point to many examples of the failure of your governments to do that. It's sort of interesting. But so yeah, there are ways to alter that. And this gets back to what I was saying to you, Bob, the other night about lability in hierarchy. I think that hierarchy is inevitable, as I define it anyway. It's just some person basically directing at a certain time what's going on, and others looking to him or her for direction. And I think that the more fluid you can make that, the better, because I think that is how it generally behaves in real life. And I take the example of like playing music. If I'm there with, a couple, 3-4 guys, and we're trying to figure a song, if someone wants to play a song, we're all going to turn to him. He's going to show us the chords and the notes. And but then if we're going to play a song, we all turn and look at the Kapellmeister. And suddenly he's using the end of his guitar to like start the beat 1 and a 2 and the song and stuff. So at different times, the hierarchy shifts. It's shifting all the time. People go back and forth. And actually, we're kind of doing it here. And Roger's the ringmaster, but like it's just people taking turns. Now you talk. Now you talk. Now you talk. And nobody's holding a gun to our heads to do this. This is something we agree to do because we have more fun this way, and it helps us interact. So
nobody listens to the ringmaster at all. You guys are like rebels, dude.
That's why he's got a whip. You need the whip and the top hat.
See. Okay, now, hold on. Bob Dub has to respawn now. See, this is what I was talking about. No. Rebels. Just rebels.
Rebels. Yes. Well, I was thinking about something that Ben Shapiro was saying. He's an interesting man. I disagree with almost everything he says. But he said something so interesting. He was saying it's not enough to have a belief system. That can make you feel happy and it can structure your life. But the point is, when you have a belief system, is that you have to go to church once a week. You have to get out there with the other people that share your ideals, that share your community. And you have to make decisions about how you guys are going to interact. And I know that used to happen back in the olden days of America. People used to get together to do church and then do their barn raisings and their bringing in the harvest, and everybody would help it. So these things are not about belief systems and how belief systems interact, as much as how the people take those belief systems and translate them into everyday life. So I think that's quite a big thing to remember, is how would any of these political systems trickle down? I hate those words because, yes, they don't work, do they? But how would it permeate through to the minds of the people who are not politically interested, shall we say? I mean, 80% of people are not interested in politics. They just want their world to run, and they want to get on with looking after their kids. And then my final thing that I'd like to say about war. I totally agree that a lot of good things, technological advances, come out of war, and that a lot of things appear to be solved by war. But I just need to say that those however many million moms are all suffering because their babies were killed. Like, is that price worth the advancement of war? Or should we say the price is too high, we need to find a different way? And I think that's kind of what I'm coming down on, is that yes, we can see our history, but unless we learn from our history, what are we really? We're just animals. The thing about us being humans is that we try to do something better tomorrow. Every day we try to do something better to make it better tomorrow. There we go.
That's pretty good.
That's my response.
Now, before any of the rebels start speaking up, it's Mark's turn. So, Mark, say something.
Okay. Just to clarify here, so in the UK, there's no proportional representation at the moment. This all first past the post. Um, Something that strikes me, that in theory, the UK political system is set up so that the individual votes for the party rather than the individual.
Huh?
In the US, we're seeing a lot more of voting for the individual rather than the party that we represent. Which I don't know, I would argue it's a lot worse.
I wasn't aware of that. That instruct me, but that's a very important distinction. Huh.
Okay, so when you bring that up, is that what you wanted to mention, and that's it? I mean, it's up to you.
I mean, we could all have a discussion about the
I mean, you got 2
history
minutes,
of
is what I'm
wars.
saying. If you don't want to do the 2 minutes, you don't have to.
No, I think I'm okay. Okay, because if we do, I can see you get into a lot of controversial hot water in relation to the sort of omelets and eggs argument.
Yeah. Now, when you were talking about that, what was it we were talking about the other day? And oh my goodness, it's your guys' equivalent of the Declaration of Independence.
The Magna Carta?
The Magna Carta. We
The
were having a conversation about that, and what stuck out to me that with what you were saying right there was that conversation where I'd asked you, I was like, how much of the Magna Carta is still honored, it's still used in government, and I believe you said like 5% of the Magna Carta is still in use.
Three of the articles.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many articles there were, but yeah, only three still exist.
Yeah. So they basically took the Magna Carta and just threw it away. It's not
Well,
even.
yeah. Wasn't a lot of it having to do with baronial rights and stuff like that don't really apply since the aristocracy so-called doesn't run things anymore. But I mean, I read it a long time ago when I was a kid because I was very interested in it, and I admit I don't remember any details, but I do seem to remember a lot of it had to do with the king's legal position vis-a-vis his noblemen. It seemed more to do about the political and social issues of that time. So I would imagine any document like this, these things evolve. I was thinking about, I think the oldest single treaty, I could be wrong about this, but I believe the oldest single treaty that's still in force is between England or Britain, I should say, and Portugal for the delivery of port wine, basically. But I mean, for wines and stuff, it goes way, way back, and it's been incorporated into every new trade agreement. I don't think the official treaty as such is, but it's one of those things where, and of course, this treaty is incorporated. But I would imagine something like Magna Carta would be more important as a foundation for further documents, rather than like here in the States, we've got the U.S. Constitution, which is our foundation document. But we're such a young country compared to Great Britain. So much less of a history. I've talked before about that. When we say here a conservative, we mean somebody that harks back to 1776 and to those men who were imbued with this conservatism that really comes from the Enlightenment and from people like Rousseau and Voltaire and all these guys. Whereas in Europe, if you're going back to being an absolute monarchist. That's conservatism. The old, the conservative then would be like, the divine right of kings and getting the Stuarts back on the throne or whatnot. It's a different. It's such a deeper history. I think sometimes we figure, well, Magna Carta, that's still got to be enforced. Dude, it was written in church Latin. You can barely read it, and it's like, and then again, it's important, but it's like something that's been built on since with so much history since then. You had a lot of kings and queens for that matter since John. So
now you got to respond to that, Mark. That's his 2 minutes.
Um,
I only had that little bit
okay.
to say, so you got to respond to everything Otto just said, dude.
No, you don't.
Yes, you
Okay.
do. Yes, you do.
Okay. The US declaration is based upon things like the UK well, Act of Rights, Bill of Rights, Act of Rights, 1698, if I'm not mistaken.
Huh.
Probably earlier, actually. But yeah, and the Act of Rights is at least semi-based on the Magna Carta. So when you talk about the U.S. Constitution, and it goes a lot further back. It goes at least 100 years, you know, give or take 100 years further back in British history.
John Locke.
It's a bit later than John Locke. Yeah, you could argue that the Enlightenment actually had some influence on that. But yeah,
Okay, you got anything you need to say to that, Bob Dub? You got to unmute.
Sorry, that's a no. I don't have anything to add at this stage. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, what about you, Otto?
I'm just looking up something on the official United Kingdom government website on the Magna Carta, Act of English Parliament. Ah, interesting. They've got the whole thing here. I'm gonna take a look at it. But see, this has gotten me interested in stuff I haven't read in a long, long time. So yeah, I'm gonna look into that. But yeah, no, yeah, our foundational, our Constitution with a big C came from, in Aristotelian terms, and these guys were thinking of Aristotle, from the constitution of our people with a small c, and that was people primarily from England and Scotland as well, you know, Welsh and this and that, people from Britain, but primarily, I think at that time, English. And this obviously informed their view of politics and the way they were going to try to craft something that would help maintain, I think they hoped, a place that could balance what I guess you would call, before we became a republic, the liberty of the subject, the liberty of the citizen now, with the necessity for the government to be able to do all those nasty government things like have jails and wars and this and that. And yes, war is always unskillful. And I never ever advocate for war, but it is going to happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. And I also want to point something else out too, just so you know, Mark, and there's a difference between the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Everybody keeps mixing that up. Like, the Bill of Rights was actually added in because George Mason stood up and walked out of the Constitutional Convention. He refused to sign the Constitution until we had a Bill of Rights put in place.
They were
Yeah.
2 votes away from banning slavery.
Yeah.
It was so close. We almost didn't have slavery in this country from the start. That would have been so much better.
So, but George Mason and the Anti-Federalists, they've actually got the Anti-Federalist papers out. If you guys ever want to check them out, it'll give you a different outlook on the United States and how we were formed in the Constitution. Like that, those are the stories people don't hear about.
Right.
New Zealand is interesting. New Zealand does not have a written constitution. They have the Treaty of Waitangi, which is the treaty between the Crown and the Maori tribes. They have the Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights of 1688. And those together are used instead of a constitution here.
Well, wouldn't you need to be your own country to have a constitution? You still got a Union Jack on your flag there.
Yeah.
Still got Charles III on your money. You know, you're not.
We use the Magna Carta.
as an American,
Yes.
yeah, and you're using a British legal document, so I'd say you're very firmly Commonwealth there. You wouldn't really need a constitution. I mean, you could have one, I guess. Obviously, I think Canada.
And
I'm
considering
not sure.
that the United Kingdom doesn't use the Magna Carta anymore, you probably are more of your own country than they
Because
are.
still applies here. Some of it still applies. Again, I'm going to look into this later on. I'm not going to start. Hey, quiet, you guys! I'm reading this. I'm on the British government website.
Well, Julian Crawford is actually an expert in New Zealand politics. So if you're interested in hearing a little bit about the New Zealand voting system and their MMR system of proportional representation, I could invite him onto the show. He would be somebody who could explain that very well.
Well, it's like I said before, he's always welcome. I've actually enjoyed having conversations with him. So if you want to, and if he's wanting to, tell him to come on here, because I always have enjoyed talking to Julie.
Cool.
Him
Awesome.
and
I'll
Vincent.
get in touch. Yes, I'm not sure if Vincent is awake at this time of day, but I think that Jules might be.
All right. So are we? Oh, there you go.
Just wondering. Something that's just struck me is it's just worth remembering that it's only been roughly 100 years since we allowed the majority to have a vote. Up to what the suffragette movement, there was no women or no women of lesser social standard having any ability to vote. Up to, I don't know, mid-last century, you would have to be a free citizen and free man of the state to be able to vote. This idea of anybody being able to vote is a relatively modern concept.
Yeah, it really is.
Which possibly could be thrown out. It might actually be helpful if somebody needed to get a license to prove that they actually had the ability and understanding for their vote to be an actual, responsible, sensible vote.
And see,
So there are.
That's the way the Greeks. That's the way the Greeks used to do it. You had to be a member of the military to be considered a citizen. If you were a peasant, no. The only way to be a citizen, you had to be in the military.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting though, if you're going to be testing people for their ability to vote, that can be a slippery slope to testing people for their ability to vote correctly, and that's a very subtle but very. And I'm reminded of you go to the totalitarian country, they had them in Russia, they had them in Germany, where you go to the ballot box and there's only one box to check. And then it's like, look, it's a 99%. I've seen pictures of these ballots. They made them, so.
Yeah, I personally believe that is going to evolve into what we need to talk about at a later time, because there's certain things that we do need to talk about when it comes to this topic. People's ideas of who should and shouldn't vote and things of that nature. Because there's a darker side to all this stuff too, and I think we should really discuss that. And the next one that we do is on episode 17. We're going to be talking about the 1928 policy conferences in my topic. So that's going to kind of get how methodical and dubious freaking the Labour Party in England really is. Like, they don't want to just control certain things. They want to control everything. No more private enterprises, no nothing. It's all ran by the state. So with that being said, let's all say goodbye, and we will tell everybody the next episode. We'll go further with this. All right.
Cool. Thank you, Roger. Awesome chat. Thanks a lot.
You too, Otto.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Everybody have a great evening or morning or whatever your time zone is.
I'm privileged to be around such brainiac people, man. You guys freaking make me feel so bad. You know what I mean? Like, all the great stuff you talk about. So I will end the stream here, and I hope you guys have a good day.
Peace.